In this video, I'll be showing you how to save and load data using shared preferences. This is a very important video because you'll probably use this in any app that you make, so I wanted to show you exactly how to do it to make it easier for you because you will be using it often. Anytime you need to save data from your user, or if they've chosen some preferences in your app, you're going to want to save that and use it later. That way they don't have to keep telling you what they would like. So we've got a lot to do. Let's get started. So normally you would already have an app that you would add this to. So I just created a demo app to kind of show you how it works. We can save different types of information, and I'll show you how to do each of them. So I have a main.dart file, which essentially just returns our home screen. And then inside of our home screen, we have a stateful widget. Very important that you're using stateful widgets because we're going to be changing our data real time. So we're going to update the state. And then here I have a list of called ints, which just gives us a random number through 0 through 5. I have a list of words, and it's just some random words. And then here we do have some variables, which are our actual data that we'll be using. We have an int, which is number, a boolean, which is our understand, and then a string, which is our word. And then I'm also using late. Late is very useful when you don't know what the data is going to be right away. So you can just put late here, and then that's just essentially telling your code, like, I need to use this, but I won't use it until I set it. So just let me use it and I'll set it before I use it, I promise. And then we also have a data one right here, which is this section right here. And then this is just going to map our string object, which is our JSON data that we're going to be creating, and we call that data. Below that, just in case you want to replicate this, I have an app bar that's just called shared preferences, and then we essentially just have some padding and a column, and then in the column I have custom rows that I created. I created my own method it just takes in our data, which is our variables we just talked about. I have an onPressed function. And then we have bar button text, which is number, understand, word, etc. And then we kind of just set that up in case you want to recreate this. But again, you would use this in your own app. And then we just pass in our number, our method that we're calling, and then the word. And then below that, I also have our data structure kind of split up. Again, normally you'd use models and stuff, but just to make it easier to read, we're just grabbing our number in our data object, our understand, and our word. And then we have an onPressed button at the bottom called clear data. And that's where we're really going to actually do all of the logic. But here I have it where we can just randomly click number and get a random number. I can click understand to be true or false, and I can choose a random word. And then if I click the data, it takes all of this information up here and then turns it into essentially a string in this scenario, but then also JSON data. However, when we refresh the app, this is actually going to delete everything, which is what we're doing in this video, so that it stays no matter when we close the app or open the app. So let's go ahead and start doing that, and then we'll kind of touch base on the functions in a moment. So right away, when you're using data, you want to be able to load the data. So what we can do here is we can actually create a function called load data, and we're going to actually put that up here just so it's kind of near the top. So we'll do load data. And then this is actually not going to return anything, so we can just do void load data, and then we can return it. So what we want to do is we want to actually load through our data, and to do this, we're going to need to use the shared preferences. So we can hit Control tilde on our keyboard, do Flutter pub add, and then shared underscore preferences. And then this will install the shared preferences that we'll be using to share the data. And it's not good to use a lot of data. I actually did another video where we can save data with spreadsheets, Google Sheets. But this is very good for smaller data, but I don't really know what the limit is, because really data in text is very small anyhow, so you could probably get away with saving this, but just keep in mind this is going to share to the user's device, so you don't want to save too much, but you could probably get away with a lot of data just because text is kilobits, right? So you can probably get away with a lot, but they always say don't use a lot in here. So because we're going to use the shared preferences, we actually want to make sure that we're using async in all of our functions or our methods. I mix those up because I use JavaScript, but we're going to get the shared preferences, so we can do final, which means it's not going to change, and then we can do shared preferences prefs equals await, and this is why we use the async, because we need to wait for this to be ready. And then we'll do shared preferences dot get instance. And what this is saying is anytime we want to use this, we're going to get the instance of our shared preferences, make sure that it's current, I believe is what it's doing, and then we're going to save it as a variable called prefs. Now what we can do is we can actually use this, and because we're going to be changing data within our state, we're going to update that without it having to reload. We're going to use set state, and this is very important while we have the stateful widget rather than a stateless widget. You can't set state, and you need to use that. Plus, we're going to be using it to call our load data at the very beginning, so you need a stateful widget for that as well. And then here we can just go ahead and change our data. So our first variable that we're going to change is our number. We can do number equals, and now we're going to call in our prefs, and we have a different way to get data, and I'll show you most of them. I think I go over most of them, but there might be one or two that we don't use, but it's all the same thing. So for our number, because we're going to get a number, an integer in this scenario, because we could get a double, but we're going to get an integer, we just call get int, which is a number, and then what we want to do is we want to pass in the key that we've saved it. We haven't saved it yet, but we'll get to that. But you want to give it the name of what the data is that you're saving. So for me, it's just called number, so I called it number. You can call this whatever you want, just make sure that you know what you're calling it, and then you can reference it later. We're going to save our data as a number with the key, and then we're going to grab the data as our key number, and hopefully that makes sense. If not, let me know in the comments, but you'll see it when we save data. We just need to make sure that they match. Now this could be null. This could be null for many reasons. One, we haven't saved any data yet. That's going to be the main thing. This is going to load data right away. If this is the very first time a person's ever using our app, there's not going to be any data here. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're aware of the null, and we can do this by putting 2 question marks. And what this says is I want you to use this information unless it's null. If it's null, then I want you to use something else, and we can pass in 0. So we're checking to see number better be what we saved. If it's not what we saved, then I want it to be 0. And then what we can come up here, because this is setting it from the beginning and we're passing in late, which means I will set this later, we can actually not call it right away, and we can just have the variable there. That way, this is what it's going to be when we're done. You can leave it if you want, it's not a big deal, but this is the better approach to take it. So now when we load our data, we're going to see, hey, have we saved this number before? Great, let's use it. If not, we're just going to pass in 0. And we'll see that in a moment when we actually save the data. Next, we're going to do the other one. So we can do underscan, again, prefs dot. This time we're going to get a bool because it is a boolean that we're saving. We're just going to call the key understand. And then just like before, if this is null, we want to pass in something else, and we're going to pass in false by default, and then we can delete it out of our data. Perfect. So hopefully you get the idea. It's very easy to use these. It's just a little complicated getting set up. I read through the documentation. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But this is what you do. Very straightforward. Next, for a word, we need to get a string. So we can do prefs dot get string, and the string list and string, we're not going to do a string list, we're just going to use the string, and then in this one we'll just call it word. And again, we want to make sure that it's not null. If it is null, then we want to pass in something else, and we'll just pass in blank. Again, it could be a blank string if you need to, or just a default word that you want to use, and then we can delete that out here. Perfect. And then the last one is going to be our data. Now our data is going to be a little bit different because it's actually data. By default, it's going to be a string, but we need to turn that string into JSON data. So to do that, what we can do here is we can make a new variable. This one, we can call it whatever we want, but we're going to call it data string because that's what makes sense. It's our data as a string. And then we're going to do prefs dot, and then again, we're going to use get string. And you'll probably use this a lot because you can just save all of this data as a string, and then decode it into JSON and use it where you need to. But again, if there's little things that you need to, then that's where the get int, get bool, and get string come in handy. Might as well just keep it simple if you don't need a big object, right? So that's kind of how we do that. And then for this, we're going to call this data. So this is the key that we'll pass when we save our data. And then we're going to grab it as a string. And then we don't need to check null. We're going to check null in a moment, but we don't need to check null right here. We don't want to pass in something else. If it is null, we want it to be null. And the reason why we want it to be null is because then we can check to see if it is null and do something different. So here, what we want to do now is we have our data up here. What we want to do is we want to now use our data string to change our data. And we can do this by doing data equals, and here we want to check to see if it's null, and we can do that by doing data string is exclamation point equal, which means not equal to null. And if it's not equal to null, then we can use the question mark, and then we can do something if it's not null. And then if it is null, then we want to do something else, and here we can just pass in a blank object, an empty object. So what we want to do, if it is not null, we want to use that data, and we can do that by mapping it just like we do up here. We're going to map it with a string comma object. That means we're going to pass in a string as our key, and our value is going to be an object. And then we're going to use the dot from, and the dot from allows us to say, hey, where is this data coming from? I'll grab that data, and then I'll do what you told me to do. I'm going to map it as a string and an object. And here's where it gets a little tricky. So we can't just pass data string. We want to pass the data string, but our data string is that. It's a string of data, and we can't turn that into a map because the system doesn't know. You just gave me a bunch of letters, right? So what we need to do is we need to decode it into JSON. And we can do this by just calling JSON decode. It'll automatically import it, and then we can pass in our data string. So I know this might be a little confusing, so I'll try to explain it. Essentially, we're grabbing all of our data, objects, everything, and we're just putting it as a string when we save the data, which we'll get to in a moment. We're going to grab that data as a string, just texts, and all of that stuff. And then we can actually decode it into actual JSON. It's going to look for the object. It's going to look for the keys. It's going to look for the values, and it's going to separate that actually as JSON. And now that we have that JSON data as an actual bunch of information, we can use that with the from. We can then map it to our data. So again, if that doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments, and I'll try to explain a little bit better. I think it makes sense, but maps took me forever. So I knew how to do JSON data forever. I never understood how to map stuff. So if it gets confusing, just let me know. But yeah, so we now have our data. So essentially we're getting our shared preferences. We're loading it into prefs. We're then grabbing out each piece of data just to kind of show you how you would do it. You normally might not do it that way. You would just grab in all of your data at once like we did here. But this is how you can get individual data if you want to. Just do prefs and then get whatever you're trying to get. Most of the time you'll use the string though, but if you need a boolean or an integer, you can do that. And then if any of this stuff is null, we're using the double question marks to check if it's null, and if it is null, we'll pass in our own data. Now what we need to do here is we need to load our data. We're not actually loading our data just because we made a method called load data. We actually need to load our data. So to do this, we can use our init state, which is built in for stateful widgets. And what init state does is it runs as soon as this screen is loaded. As soon as this screen is loaded, before anything else happens, it's going to run init state. So what we can do is, hey, as soon as you're going to load, I want you to load my data. This way, my data is there before you even start trying to fill stuff in or show anything. I want my data to be there. And then we can save it. Now, if we do this, even though we've loaded our data, we can actually refresh, and we're going to get an error because, it has not been initialized. Okay, so disregard what I said. You still need to initialize the data, even though it is late. So I should have tested that out. but that's fine. Just don't delete your initialized data. It's going to throw an error on you. And then no implementation. Okay, if this pops up, this is great learning experience. If this pops up, just close everything and reload. That's just a weird issue that sometimes happens, and I don't know why. So we'll wait for it to reload, and that issue should go away. All right, so we've reloaded our app. The issue has gone away, and then we can go ahead and refresh it. Now, I'm getting an issue here that you won't have, and it's because I've tested this already. So this data is actually saving, even though we're not saving the data. As you can see, it's to true like number 2 understand true. For you, this won't happen yet because we haven't saved any data, but this is very important why we need to clear our data at some point in time, because whatever data was there would still be stored even if we were to reload this app later, if we didn't clear it out before we ended the app. So for me, it's storing different data, but at that point, normally it should have been 0 false blank, and as you can see, I do have stored data in there already. So let's go ahead and move on to how we store the data. Now that we've successfully loaded the data that's in there, let's go ahead and make it so we can actually save the data, because it's kind of already working, but that's because I was testing it. So just like how easy, hopefully you feel that it is to load data, it's just as easy as it is to save data. So the easiest way to do this is just by creating methods like we're doing right here. Here we have our update number method, and we're going to call this when we update our number. So when we're updating our number, what we can do is we can add in the ability to save our number as well. Again, we do have our method as async because we're going to need that to await our shared preferences, and we essentially just do the same thing. We do final shared preferences prefs, oops, if I can type, prefs equals await shared preferences dot get instance. Perfect. So again, just like we did at the above when we were loading the data, we're going to do the same when we're setting the data. We need to get a reference of our shared preferences, which in this case we've called prefs. But now what we can do is here's where we're changing our number. So all we have to do is just do prefs, and instead of get int or get bool, we can just set it. So we can set the int since this is our number, and here's what we want to do is pass in the key that we used earlier. Again, these are our keys: number, understand, word, and data. These are the keys that we're getting. So when we save data, we just have to save those keys. So we can do number, and then we need to pass in the value. For this, it's going to be our actual number, which we already have saved as a variable. Here it gives us a random number. That's all it's really doing, creating a random number between the list length and then setting it as choosing one of those random numbers. And then we just pass in the number. And it's that simple to actually save data. And if we refresh this, we can then click our number. Here our random number is now 4. It was 2. Remember when I refresh it, and we refresh it, it's now 4. We're already saving and loading data. We were already loading the data. Now we've saved it. Same with the update understand. We can save ourselves some time and copy this. Paste this in, and then after we've set our understand, here we're just switching it. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. And then we'll do press dot set bool, and then this time we'll pass in our understand. And then for the value, it can be whatever we want, but in this case, we want it to be the value of our understand. And then we can save that. Let's go ahead and do the update word real quick. We're setting the word, and then just like before, we do prefs dot set string, and then we're going to pass in the key, which in this case is word, and then the value, we already have a variable for it. It is word. And that is how easy it is to update data, setting your data and loading your data, which is really awesome. Now, the trickiest part is when you're using JSON data, which we've done with our data. Just like it was a little bit different with our data, it's going to be a little bit different when setting the data, but still not difficult at all. So here we're going to come under our update data. Again, this could be wherever you're saving data, but this is what I'm using. We're going to set our prefs, and then right here we can actually just do it at the very bottom. This is essentially just grabbing all of our data that we've already set and turning it into an object. And then we're setting that we're essentially just seeing if the data that we have right here matches our new updated data. If it doesn't, then data equals our updated data. So very simple, a very easy way to, hey, if my data is the same, why waste your time changing it? If it's different, if my current data is different than my updated data, then please set that state and change it. So now we have the data here. But what we can do now is we can save this just like we saved it earlier as a string. We can actually save it now. So press set string, and then this is going to take in our data as the key. And then for the value, we need to encode our JSON data into a string. When we were loading the data, we were taking our string of JSON data and decoding it into actual JSON data. So we need to do the opposite when we're saving it. And this is very easy. We just do JSON encode, and then we pass in our data. And all this says is, hey, data is an object that looks like this. This is our actual object of our data. Number, number, understand, word. And it's grabbing in those values. And then we're going to encode that into an actual string and then setting that string as data. I hope that makes sense. Again, it's very easy when you get the hang of it, and I'm hoping that's coming across in the video. But that's it. That's all we have to do. And then we can actually refresh our app, and then we can save the data as well. So if we do number, random number is 2, true is now false, our word is comment. If we hit data, we now have number 2, understand equals false, word is comment. That's kind of what our string looks like. And then this is how we get the data. And then if we refresh, that data, all of that data is going to stay the same. I did refresh the app, and it's staying the same. And then the last thing, like I said earlier in the video, is you want to make sure that you save your data, clear your data at some point in times if you want to. If someone's deleting the app, you could clear the data there, stuff like that. You don't necessarily have to if they want to stay the same, but you might get some weird errors if you're not clearing the data and then later change how your app works. You always want to have the ability for you to clear the data and the user to clear the data. And this is very easy as well. We're just going to get our prefs again, and then we can just do prefs.clear. Prefs.clear will clear all of them if you don't pass in an actual one to clear. So just keep that in mind. So if you need to clear an individual one, you can do prefs.remove, and then that would remove all the data with that. But we're just going to clear all the ones that we have. So it's prefs.clear. I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. Prefs.clear clears all of them. Prefs.remove would remove the data of the actual key. So if we just wanted to remove the data in number, we would do prefs.remove number, pass in the key. But for this scenario, we're just going to clear all of them. So we can save that. And now if we click clear data, nothing looks like it happens. But when we refresh the app, all of our data is back to the defaults. So I hope this was very helpful for you. It did take me a while to figure out how to get shared preference properly. The easiest way is really just clean your code up and make methods, and then just use that when you need it. Set the string or the other data is very easy. Just pass in a key and a value, and then loading the data, if you keep it very clean and separate, is very easy as well. Load the data, check if it's null. If it's null, set other data, and it can be whatever you want. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what you create and what you're saving data for and loading data for. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.